Welcome to the deep dive. So, today we're doing something a little different. This is a special compilation.
Right.
We're taking a journey not into the why of these high-stakes worlds, but into the sheer heart-pounding reality of living right on the absolute fringe.
Yeah.
We've gone back through our archives and we are pulling the most dramatic, the most death-defying accounts. These are the I should be dead stories.
These are really the moments of convergence.
Yeah.
It's the perfect storm where all these external threats, we're talking organized violence, we're talking systemic failure, law enforcement, they all meet this internal reality of desperation.
And who are we talking about?
We've pulled dozens of stories from our guests. I mean, everyone from cartel strategists and, high-level international smugglers, all the way to shot callers in maximum security prisons.
And our mission today, it's simple, but it's very specific. We're not interested in just summarizing the paperwork, the case files. We want to immerse you, the listener, in the raw, sensory experience of these moments. What did they smell? What did they feel? What was the cinematic, terrifying, unadulterated reality of that 1 nanosecond when life just flashed before their eyes?
We're hunting for the details that stick.
Exactly.
And so if you're bringing the adrenaline, I'm bringing the analysis.
The actuary.
I want to try and build the survival equation. When you're facing these overwhelming, often fatal odds, whether it's against rival gangs, the elements, or federal agents, what was the one factor that tipped the scales?
Right.
Was it meticulously rehearsed preparation? Was it lightning-fast improvisation under duress? Or was it just, terrifyingly unpredictable luck? We want to know the difference between being prepared and being spared.
Ooh, I like that. Prepared versus spared. That is a phenomenal distinction. Okay, let's unpack this. We'll start with section 1, escaping the net. These are the close calls with law enforcement. The moments of near capture where, tactical ingenuity or just a sudden burst of genius was the only thing separating freedom from a 30-year federal bid.
Well, the initial phase of survival in any criminal world is evasion. It has to be. And evasion, it doesn't matter if you are a high-level smuggler or a street dealer. It really comes down to exploiting blind spots.
What kind of blind spots?
They can be logistical weaknesses in surveillance or, and this is more interesting to me, they can be systemic biases in human psychology.
Let's start with one of the most brilliant pieces of quick thinking we have ever heard. I call it the improvised military dodge. So we've got this smuggler. He's driving alone. He's been on the road for 15 hours straight.
15 hours.
He is running on fumes, pure exhaustion, trying to beat the clock. And he described the weather as just pissing rain.
Awful conditions.
And on top of all that, he has a serious load. 30 pounds of high-grade marijuana tucked away in the trunk. That combination, speeding, exhaustion, bad weather, it just sounds like a guaranteed recipe for disaster.
It absolutely maximized every single risk factor. Think about it. Speeding and driving in adverse conditions, that immediately flags you as reckless or maybe impaired.
Which is exactly what a cop is looking for.
Exactly. So the fact that he was pulled over was not bad luck. It was statistically a high probability. But what happens next? This is where the analysis of that institutional bias becomes fascinating.
He gets pulled over, state trooper, lights are flashing behind him, and the entire fate of his operation, maybe his whole life, it all hinges on a single split-second narrative he has to come up with.
And that narrative was supplied by something incredibly simple.
A sticker.
A simple Marine sticker on the rear bumper of the car.
Crazy.
Right. That sticker, it served as this immediate nonverbal signal. It just bypasses the standard adversarial nature of a traffic stop.
It creates a connect.
It created a temporary, powerful rapport. It's leveraging what you could call institutional social capital. The officer, who the source notes loved the military, saw the traffic violator, sure, but he immediately overlaid a different identity on top of that. Potential soldier.
So the cop walks up, and instead of the usual license and registration, he immediately asks the inevitable question.
Where'd you serve?
Yep.
Now, a seasoned criminal knows that lying about being a veteran is incredibly dangerous. Cops can check service records. They can ask for a military ID. It's an easy lie to expose.
So what does he do?
The smuggler delivers what he called the best piece of improv he ever pulled out of his ass.
He didn't claim to be an active Marine, did he? Because that would require instant proof.
No, that's the genius of it. He instantly claimed he was on his way to Portland to enlist. He claimed future service, potential, aspiration.
That is brilliant.
That is split-second risk assessment. Claiming to be going to enlist, It taps into the cops' positive biases about, young Americans showing dedication.
Mm-hmm.
But crucially, it removes the need for immediate verifiable proof.
It changes the whole dynamic.
It shifts the entire interaction from law enforcement to, well, to mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
The cop, smiling, just says, "Best of luck, soldier. Drive safe."
And that's it.
That's it. He speeds off. He completely fails to notice the fatigue, the nervousness, or, the lingering smell of the product.
All of it.
All of it.
Yeah.
It's completely overridden by that emotional connection to the military story he just heard.
The relief in that moment, though, I mean, can you imagine the adrenaline crash after the cop's taillights disappear?
No.
It must have been just overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely.
But this dodge, it really highlights the difference between pure luck and, like you said, rapid calculation.
Mm-hmm.
It was a calculated risk that exploited a known variable.
It was absolutely a calculated risk. Luck would have been the cop getting a more urgent call and having to leave.
Right.
Calculation was understanding the cop's worldview and instantly feeding him the script that he wanted to hear.
So beyond these split-second lies, though, some operations rely on incredibly advanced techniques, almost like counterintelligence level stuff.
Oh, yeah?
The amount of mechanical and even biological engineering that goes into drug evasion is staggering, especially when you get to the cartel level.
Absolutely. Cartel evasion isn't just about, driving fast or having a good hiding spot. It's about making the product biologically or visually invisible to professional detection tools.
Okay, so let's get into that. What are the specific methods they use to beat detection at the border?
Well, the first one is a direct attack on probably the most effective tool they have.
The dogs.
The dope dog, exactly.
Yep.
The cartels were dipping kilos of marijuana in a liquid oil.
In oil, what does that do?
It's a complex chemical countermeasure. So a dog detects what are called volatile organic compounds, VOCs, that evaporate from the substance.
The scent particles.
Right. By dipping the product in oil, you're essentially creating a sealant. Marijuana is naturally hydrophobic. It repels water, but it'll absorb oil. So the oil physically suppresses the evaporation of those VOCs.
It's creating an olfactory barrier.
That's a perfect way to put it. It doesn't eliminate the scent entirely, but it drastically lowers the signal to a point below the dog's reliable detection threshold.
So it's not just some quick dip. This is an engineering process designed to specifically confuse the dog's sense of smell.
Precisely. And then there's the visual side. They had mechanics drill small, precise holes in the car trunk, or sometimes in the undercarriage panels, right where the product was stashed.
Holes? Why would you drill holes? Wouldn't that just draw attention to the fact that you've customized something?
You'd think so, but the holes weren't meant to be hidden. They were meant to accumulate dust and road grime naturally.
Oh, clever.
Over a long journey, say 900 miles through those arid border regions, the dust gets in and settles evenly inside the hidden compartment. So when a border inspector opens it up and looks inside, it just looks old, undisturbed, and structurally integrated.
It's creating a visual narrative of just normal driving. They're literally manufacturing evidence of age and neglect to blend in. That is incredible attention to detail.
It's manufacturing normalcy. And then finally, there's the psychological evasion technique they were taught.
Which was?
To look the officer directly in the eye and answer all their questions calmly.
That has to be the hardest part. I mean, that's a huge psychological tell that trips up most amateurs. You're taught to be nervous around cops, even if you're innocent.
Right.
If you're carrying 50 kilos in the back, maintaining that flat effect, that calm demeanor, that must be nearly impossible.
That's the stress test. If the smuggler can maintain direct eye contact and a flat, measured tone, they completely undercut the officer's reliance on subtle body language cues.
The sweating, the darting eyes.
Exactly. All the over-explaining. Those are the primary indicators they use in secondary questioning. So this is an exercise in supreme emotional control under the most intense pressure imaginable.
But, as sophisticated as the cartels get, the feds, they learn and they adapt. And eventually, their surveillance focus shifts away from the product itself.
And that leads to the financial interception,
Yeah.
the thing we've termed the cash trap.
This is a textbook example of adaptive surveillance, isn't it?
It is. They realized that seizing the product was logistically difficult, and often it was low impact compared to crippling the financial infrastructure. The vulnerability wasn't the weed, it was the cash being sent back to the organizers.
And we saw this with the case of the money laundering kingpin, who was busted after a drug-sniffing dog, a cash-sniffing dog, in this case alerted agents to a massive package at a FedEx sorting facility.
The irony there is just profound. Major carriers, UPS, FedEx, the Postal Service, They've become the de facto financial highways for these large criminal organizations.
Because they offer speed, reliability.
And perceived anonymity.
Hmm.
But they also create these centralized points of weakness, these hubs, where the flow can be audited and intercepted.
And the feds capitalized on it beautifully. They intercepted 2 separate cash shipments that totaled somewhere between $3 and $5 million in a really short period of time.
And that massive financial loss, that was the operational close call. Even though not a single ounce of product was seized, that immediately severed the financial lifeline, and it just shut down the entire enterprise.
It reveals a clear institutional priority.
It does. Hitting the financial backbone is far more effective than just chasing the green product itself. It's a systemic chokehold.
Before we leave this idea of the net, let's talk about the absolute terror of near capture from the mule's perspective.
Right.
The source, who was a drug mule landing at JFK Airport, he'd been out of the country for 5 years. He described this moment of just overwhelming panic.
Right, so he had managed to stay away, to operate, to survive all the internal dangers of the organization. His only fear now was the institutional net that he knew was waiting for him as soon as he re-entered the country.
He said the moment the plane landed, the second the wheels touched the tarmac at JFK, this intense feeling that this is about to get heavy just hit him. It wasn't physical. It was purely psychological. The crushing weight of the system just descending on him.
The panic was so acute, he actually considered a physical escape. He asked himself, can I run through JFK? Which was then followed by this immediate, brutal realization that, no, post-9/11 security made escape completely impossible.
That's such a critical psychological boundary, isn't it? The architectural reality of a post-9/11 airport just eliminated the possibility of flight. He was enclosed, tracked, and trapped before he even got off the plane.
And he was detained and interrogated in the back room almost immediately.
Yeah.
He was identified primarily because of how long he'd been out of the country and his known associations.
So the close call there isn't a car chase.
No. It's the loss of that last sliver of control the moment you re-enter the system. It's realizing that survival through evasion is over, and now survival depends entirely on your mental fortitude and your capacity to withhold information.
Okay, let's move now from the calculation of evasion to the sheer visceral reality of surviving violence. Section 2. Violence survived.
All right.
This is where the human body becomes the battlefield, and we are going into extreme raw detail here to really understand what it takes to endure the unimaginable.
We're examining assaults, torture, and close-quarters knife fights. This is the ultimate test of physiological and psychological endurance, where that line between life and death is defined by milliseconds and, in some cases, breath control.
Let's start with one of the most harrowing accounts we've ever covered, Roger Reeves and surviving cartel torture. And this wasn't just abuse, this was at the hands of the Mexican federal police.
This is systematized psychological destruction.
Describe the scene for us, because this is pure sensory horror.
He was immediately stripped of all agency. He was confined to this tiny, suffocating space, a small, 5-foot-wide cement cell with no door and no light.
No door.
It was a cloth, so it was designed to maximize isolation but minimize privacy. But the real horror wasn't what he saw. It was what he heard.
The auditory horror.
Exactly. He was subjected to the constant muffled sounds of other people being tortured and beaten nearby, screams, impacts, pleas. That continuous soundscape is designed to be as psychologically destructive as the physical abuse itself.
Your mind knows exactly what's coming next.
And the anticipation is designed to break your will before the physical pain even begins.
And the police used these specific, brutal methods. They were designed to inflict maximum terror while extracting information. First, there was the gas attack.
Yes, he was forced to whiff what he described as a terrible gas that felt like it almost blew my head off. Now, we don't know the specific chemical agent, but the physiological response would have been extreme coughing, burning airways, and just this overpowering feeling of suffocation.
The immediate, desperate response must have been just agonizing, a complete loss of control.
And this is where his capacity for immediate critical adaptation saved his life. Reeves realized the gas was being administered sporadically, so he learned to analyze the rhythm of the attack.
And what did he do?
He learned to hold his breath until the very last possible moment. He would endure the burning sensation just to survive the next inhale, conserving oxygen and minimizing his exposure.
He weaponized breath control. He turned a basic biological necessity into a tactical defense. That requires not just physical toughness, but an incredible presence of mind under total, absolute stress.
That's the core of survival in an environment like that. It's less about fighting back physically and more about hyper-analyzing the precise mechanism of the torture and then countering it with these tiny micro-adjustments, in this case, breath conservation.
And then came the waterboarding. Being tied back, a rag over his face, and water for what he said was about 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
To the average person, 20 minutes is an eternity in a scenario designed for involuntary asphyxiation.
Well, the experience of waterboarding isn't just the feeling of drowning. It's the systematic erasure of your natural reflex to breathe. When he survived that 20 minutes, it wasn't due to luck. It was due to a refusal to break that hypervigilant analysis he had already applied to the gas attack. He just kept holding on to that last sliver of control, his ability to manage panic and conserve air until the absolute limit.
That is just immense fortitude. Okay, let's pivot from that kind of physical endurance under torture to a more strategic calculation in the face of certain death. This is what we call the Sicario's act of survival.
Right. An organization gives an impossible suicidal order. A cartel member was told to go alone with only a pistol to fight a high-value target.
And the target was protected.
Protected by an armored vehicle and a 10-person escort.
Statistically, that is not a mission. That's an execution order framed as a mission.
It is. The organization expects blind, unquestioning loyalty. They expect the Sicario to see this as some kind of honor, or at least a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the group.
But he refused. This is the moment where we see pure, rational self-interest just take precedence over organizational dogma. He told his commander straight up, "I'm not going to let them kill me."
And his justification was just chillingly logical. He noted that even if, by some miracle, he managed to kill the primary target, he would never survive the encounter to count it or, collect the reward.
So his survival factor was just sound, instantaneous risk analysis.
Completely. He assessed the expected utility of the mission, which was 0 probability of survival, high probability of failure, and he chose self-preservation.
It's such a clear case of rational calculation overriding that expectation of fealty and blind obedience. The actuary you must see this as a survival metric rooted in assessing the odds, not emotional loyalty.
It is. And it forces the commander to back down because the refusal is based on logic, not on cowardice. He literally chose life over the immediate rewards of a successful hit and the promise of, organizational standing.
Now let's contrast that very strategic refusal with the absolute chaos and adrenaline dump of the prison Shang fight.
Yeah.
We're detailing the NLR members' experience. And for our listeners, NLR stands for Nazi Lowriders, a known prison gang.
This was close combat at its most primal and brutal. It showcases just how quickly the environment in there can turn fatal. So he successfully wins a knife fight against one rival inside a cell.
Okay, immediate victory.
But the danger multiplies the second he exits that cell.
A gauntlet of death. 7 other rivals were waiting for him outside the door with knives and rods, pieces of rebar or heavy pipe used as blunt weapons.
He was literally running for his life through a confined space against overwhelming numbers. And the physical damage he sustained was severe. He was hit 4 times with a rod, and he specifically felt the impact on his spleen, a visceral, painful injury that signals massive internal trauma.
He described feeling woozy, close to collapsing, but knowing that if he lets himself pass out, he's dead right there on the tier. That internal alarm clock telling him to just keep moving. That's pure survival instinct.
But then, amidst all the adrenaline of the trauma, he has an institutional close call that just defies all logic. A white correctional officer catches him, weapon in hand, running and bleeding.
And instead of following standard procedure, confiscating the weapon, sending him to the hole, escalating the charge, the guard simply said, "Take off, man. You need that more than I do."
And lets him go.
Let him escape with the weapon.
That small, highly localized act of institutional aid, it just highlights the bizarre inverted morality of the prison environment.
The guard recognized something.
The guard recognized that the weapon wasn't a threat to him. It was a necessary tool for self-defense in that specific environment. It was an unexpected moment of practical, if cynical, empathy.
So was it luck?
It's pure luck. Or maybe it's a calculated acknowledgement of the brutal reality of the yard by that specific officer.
Before we move on, we need to quickly define the rules of jailhouse combat because the terminology and the intent behind the injury, it matters immensely for survival.
This is critical for understanding the landscape of violence. There's a crucial difference between stabbings and slashings, which are often called buck-50s.
A buck-50, that refers to the number of stitches, right? Around 150 to close the wound?
Exactly. Slashings are usually a form of discipline. They're delivered across the face or the torso, and they're meant to mark, to disfigure, to humiliate. It's a statement of power, but without the primary intent to kill.
Whereas
Stabbings, using an improvised weapon called a burner or a piece, often it's sharpened metal up to 8 inches long, are generally meant for execution. They target vital organs.
So if you get slashed, you're being disciplined. If you get stabbed, you're being targeted for elimination.
For the most part. The common end goal of an informal, spontaneous knife fight, as the inmates described it, is simply achieving dominance. It's when one is laid up.
So the objective is to render the opponent harmless.
Right. Show superior strength. It's not necessarily execution unless the hit is pre-ordered, deliberate, and sanctioned by a power structure.
Okay, let's move to Section 3. Operational catastrophes. These are the moments where external forces war, mechanical failure, organizational decay push survivors to the absolute edge of disaster. The scope of the potential fatality here involved entire crews or platoons.
Right. So we're shifting now from personal close quarters violence to the macro violence of war zones and the perils of the elements, where survival depends less on your personal skill and more on institutional resilience or, the lack thereof.
The Blackwater Combat Log provides some of the most horrifying, indelible imagery of daily proximity to death that we've ever heard. This is for a mercenary in Iraq. This isn't a battle. This is a constant siege.
The sheer normalization of extreme danger is what separates this experience. The source was operating in an environment where they were getting hit by 3 to 4 rockets a day.
Every day.
Every single day. This creates a constant ambient threat that just shreds your nerves. It requires not just physical courage, but a total restructuring of your psychological baseline.
You can't operate under that level of sustained threat without some severe consequences. And the source provided these 2 images of unrelenting horror that define this reality. First, witnessing a VBIED, a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, blow up a checkpoint containing Marines.
The instantaneous nature of that devastation is crucial. IEDs are designed for maximum shock and damage. But the psychological apex of this account involved the scene of just impossible helplessness.
Witnessing 4 Marines burn alive in a tank. And the source describes the mercenary team being forced to pray for the worst possible thing. They were praying that the wind will pick up so the fire will get hotter because there's no saving them.
Just think about that inversion of instinct. The normal human emotional response turns into this desperate plea for an accelerated death because the current reality is slow, agonizing, and completely unchangeable.
That is the raw, unadulterated reality of war.
It is, where the only survival measure left is the psychological acceptance of the inevitable impossibility of rescue.
The sheer gravity of that detail is just crushing. And then there was the daily routine that followed these events.
Yes, the necessity of routine maintenance that involves cleaning human remains. They had to use pressure washers to wash blood out of vehicles after missions.
Wow.
And this is the final gruesome sensory detail, the smell, the mess, the cleaning of human remains that just becomes normalized operational procedure. The close call isn't dying. The close call is surviving the daily psychological trauma of what you're forced to witness and clean up.
Let's transition from the horror of combat to the peril of the open water. The smugglers' sea safety.
Okay.
The old-school pot smugglers, they face the relentless, indifferent power of the ocean, where operational failure can mean drowning and, of course, massive financial loss.
The dangers of a boat sinking on a smuggling run were frequent. We heard accounts of other captains who would open the seacocks. These are valves designed to admit water, and intentionally sink their own boats if they were being chased or compromised by the Coast Guard.
The traditional assumption being, lose the evidence, save the crew.
Exactly. But the source, who was a highly successful smuggler, corrects this nautical myth with a simple, brutal truth that speaks volumes about the nature of the product.
What'd he say?
He said, "Marijuana floats, man. It goes right up to the top."
Ah.
Sinking the boat doesn't solve the evidence problem at all. It simply turns your load into a highly visible, distributed surface recovery operation for the authorities. It risks the lives of the crew, and you lose the product. It's an amateur move.
So the survival factor here wasn't knowing how to ditch a load. It was knowing better than to even try.
Precisely. The source who ran his operation from 1977 to 1980, he never had a load ripped off, and he never had to ditch bales. His operational close call was always avoided because of superior logistics, weather planning, and control over his route and his crew. His survival relied on preparation, not luck, in avoiding a sinking ship.
Finally, in this section, we see that in a high-level organized crime, the biggest catastrophe often doesn't come from external forces like the police or the Coast Guard. It comes from within. Surviving organizational hits.
The Detroit Kingpin's close call is a perfect demonstration of this internal peril. He was almost killed, not by the feds, but because the chief, the leader of his organization, found out he was still talking to a guy named Danny, who the chief had already planned to kill.
So this wasn't an operational failure, it was a crisis of loyalty. The close call wasn't law enforcement intercepting a load, it was internal politics and perceived disloyalty that almost got him murdered.
This is a critical insight into these high-level organized crime structures. The biggest operational close call is betrayal. It's the inevitable infighting caused by ambition and paranoia.
Right.
Law enforcement might send you to prison years later, but disloyalty within the ranks gets you killed immediately, and often brutally. The actuary in me notes that in these environments, the most significant risk is the human element closest to you, which requires this constant, exhausting social vigilance.
Now let's step inside the walls for Section 4, the institutional close call. When the threat isn't external or localized, but it's systemic and inescapable, survival takes on an entirely different and often demoralizing meaning.
This segment explores the violence, the systemic neglect, and the unexpected institutional dangers behind bars, where the rules of civil society are completely inverted and the environment itself is actively trying to break you down.
Let's start with the sheer shocking detail of institutional neglect. This was from the Aryan Brotherhood's experience with what they called the Shit River. This is a visceral image that immediately communicates the failure of the institution.
During a prolonged period in solitary confinement, the sewage system catastrophically failed, and the result was a literal shit river of old fermented crap flowing through the cell block floor.
I just want the listener to fully grasp the environmental horror of that. These inmates were forced to stand on their bunks. They had no running water for a month. And the solution provided by the guards was impossible. They were given a hand towel and a bar of soap to clean up the mess.
The environment wasn't just punitive, it was an active assault on sanitation, on dignity, on basic human rights. The entire prison smelled, as the source described it, like a nasty construction site porta potty, but fermented, old, and inescapable.
Survival in that situation isn't about fighting a rival. It's trying not to succumb to systemic disease or the profound psychological degradation of living in literal human filth.
This type of institutional neglect is a form of slow death. It's a constant close call with disease and despair. The lack of running water, the inability to clean, the stench it, all contributes to a complete breakdown of human dignity. It's a constant low-grade trauma that wears the psyche down, often more effectively than targeted violence.
Next, we have a cold, calculated murder that highlights the terrifying power of prison organizations and, critically, the complicity of guards. The calculated murder by the Mexican Mafia. And for our listeners, the Mexican Mafia, La M, is one of the most powerful and feared prison gangs in the U.S.
This is the ultimate tragic close call that failed. A man had only 10 days left on his federal sentence. He was literally packing his bags, anticipating freedom, and then he was murdered. Stabbed a staggering 32 times.
32 times.
Mm-hmm.
That is an act of overkill. It demonstrates an utter lack of concern for subtlety or deterrence.
And the rationale is chilling. It speaks to the absolute power of La M. The killing was an organized hit, and it was triggered because a correctional officer, toed on him for writing letters to an underage girl.
Wait, the guard told the Mexican Mafia that the inmate had broken one of the unwritten codes of conduct, and that effectively signed the inmate's death warrant.
Exactly. Zero consideration was given for his upcoming release or the legal concept of due process. The killing was immediate and absolute. This illustrates the true concept of institutional danger. Guards are not neutral figures.
No.
They can, through collaboration or carelessness, enable or trigger violence by relaying sensitive information to gangs like La M. It shows that survival is often entirely out of the individual's hands, subject to the whims of the internal power structure.
So you spend years surviving your sentence, only to be murdered because a guard decided to outsource justice to the Mexican Mafia 10 days before your release. It's just horrifying.
You have a profound loss of control, where the very institution meant to secure you becomes the active facilitator of your death.
Let's talk about the immediate life-altering shock of just entering prison, first-day terror, and the rule of the yard.
The immediate shock described by one witness at Two Rivers Maximum Security Prison was witnessing a man get rocked, killed on his very first day on the yard.
This isn't a story you hear about later. This is an event that immediately reconfigures your entire understanding of reality.
And the victim was a sex offender who was killed by a lifer, someone serving life without parole who needed to prove his stripes right away.
The lifer had nothing left to lose.
Nothing. He used the newly arrived unprotected sex offender as the easiest, lowest-risk target to establish his dominance. He was making a profound, violent statement to the entire yard. The crime was secondary. The establishment of power was primary.
The witness's immediate internal reaction to this was profound. He said he felt that his old life was gone forever, and he recognized that this was the only real time he felt like dying. That sudden, brutal exposure to a lawless environment is the true close call. It's the psychological realization that survival requires a total, immediate paradigm shift. You have to become someone else to live.
The close call wasn't physical death in that moment, but the death of his former self, and the sudden, terrifying necessity to adapt or perish.
We've also heard about the relentless psychological warfare that gets used near the end of a sentence. We call it fighting the clock, where hope itself becomes a liability.
This details the close call right before parole. An inmate who was within 10 months of securing his freedom was being deliberately provoked by a smart dude. The educator knew the inmate was under immense, crushing pressure to maintain discipline to get out.
The hope of freedom is the vulnerability. If the parole-seeking inmate gives in to the provocation and fights, he loses his parole date. He could add years, if not decades, to his sentence.
The aggressor used the system itself as the weapon. He knew that the fight was unwinnable for the victim, even if the victim won the physical brawl. The psychological warfare involves constant petty humiliations trying to force a reaction.
So the survival choice here requires this agonizing suppression of ego. You have to swallow your pride when every instinct you have screams for retaliation.
It is a perfect close call because the risk isn't physical death. It's the death of hope and the potential loss of freedom. A psychological and judicial death sentence. It demands a level of emotional control that is arguably harder to maintain than physical toughness. You have to endure constant insult while knowing the prize is so close.
Which brings us to our final analytical section, the survival equation: mindset, luck, or choice. What separated these survivors from the statistics they so narrowly escaped? We want to analyze the decision-making under pressure and the long-term psychological restructuring that allowed them to survive these ultimate tests.
Right. Let's synthesize everything we've heard. Contrast that passive luck with active strategic survival.
The bedrock of survival philosophy seems to come from the jailhouse lawyer. He recounted this core piece of advice taught by an old head to survive county jail and later prison. It's a philosophy that addresses the overwhelming nature of time spent incarcerated.
And the philosophy is, stay in the moment. Forget about the past. Don't worry about the future. Live now. It's a radical, aggressive form of presence.
That makes so much sense. Regret about the past can cripple you, and focusing too much on the future like parole can make you vulnerable, as we just discussed.
It's a mental lockdown on regret or anticipation. The application of this advice is to focus on staying alive physically, while simultaneously keeping your spirit alive by avoiding the traps of institutionalization and constantly calculating how to get out unscathed relatively.
But not everyone has that controlled mindset. Let's contrast that strategic presence with an extreme state of mental exhaustion and despair. We have the death wish versus survival instinct, as displayed by the NLR shooter.
This is the NLR member who had survived years of violence, only to find himself being shot at by an officer who was unloading an entire clip at him. His shocking admission in that moment of crisis was that he ran straight at the shooter.
That's an act of self-annihilation, not survival. Why would he do that?
He was at a point where the violence, the institutionalization, the trauma, it had all created an almost suicidal state of mind. He thought if he was to die doing something, people would be better off. He was seeking an end, believing his life had become a burden.
Yet, this self-destructive impulse is contrasted with his earlier highly strategic action, that close call where the white cop let him keep his shank.
Right.
That required quick judgment and strategic non-aggression toward the guard.
And this highlights the split personality of survival under sustained stress. There are moments where the subject's actions are self-destructive, born from profound psychological fatigue like running at the gun. And then there are moments that are highly strategic, born from tactical necessity like acquiring and keeping the defensive weapon. Survival isn't a straight line. It's a messy series of contradictory decisions influenced by your mental state.
Moving to a nonviolent but equally critical survival strategy in the federal system, we look at Otisville, using social capital as armor.
The setting is crucial here. Other inmates were lined up, waiting, to kill an associate named Lou for cooperating with the feds. The danger was immediate, and it was sanctioned by the prison population. Lou was marked.
So what was the survival tactic?
It involved a high-profile informant, who was also incarcerated there, simply walking with Lou from the woodshop.
That's it.
By maintaining constant physical proximity, the informant used his own significant status, his social capital, as a deterrent. The potential killers didn't act because they didn't want the informant as an unintended witness. That would draw unwanted attention and potential retaliation from rival power structures.
So social capital literally became a force field. The killers chose operational convenience over a high-profile risk, proving that sometimes just being seen with the right person is enough to survive a sanctioned hit.
It illustrates that survival in complex, organized environments is often a matter of leveraging non-physical assets, like reputation and association, rather than brute force.
Finally, let's look at the ultimate calculation of cost and reward. The cost of the close call, from the former Kingpin's analysis.
He lost $1 million to the feds, and he spent 18 months in federal prison. From any objective financial and temporal standpoint, that is a catastrophic loss of freedom and wealth.
Most people would emerge from that experience feeling cheated, broken, ruined.
But his assessment was that the entire experience was absolutely worth it.
Why?
Because it gave him material for his thriving YouTube channel and his comedic career.
I have to challenge that from an analytical standpoint. He traded potential decades of freedom and millions of dollars for life experience and content. That is a spectacularly skewed risk calculation when you view it through a standard actuarial lens.
It is, objectively. The risk outweighs the monetary and temporal reward by several orders of magnitude. However, from a psychological survival perspective, reframing that negative traumatic experience as valuable content is how he justifies the cost. It's how he transforms his history into a sustainable, legitimate future.
So the close call didn't just test him physically, it literally became his new vocation. He justified the immense loss by converting it into a monetizable asset.
That is the ultimate twist on survival.
Yeah.
It's not just physical or psychological endurance. It's vocational and financial adaptation. He took the worst experience of his life and turned it into his biggest win, effectively settling the debt of his trauma by making it profitable.
This whole spectrum of these close calls, from the moment of desperation and holding your breath in a cement cell to the improvised lie to a cop it, underscores one fundamental, terrifying truth.
Which is that danger is rarely singular. It's multi-layered. You are simultaneously fighting external forces like law enforcement or the elements, internal factors like organizational politics and paranoia, and the systemic dehumanizing brutality of institutions. Survival requires adapting to all three layers at the same time, often with contradictory strategies.
We saw the high-level calculation of the Sicario who chose life over blind loyalty, and then the pure, terrifying institutional luck of the guard's momentary mercy in the prison yard. We saw survival rooted in technical evasion with the oil-dipped product, and desperate physiological endurance under waterboarding.
Survival is a messy combination of things. The genetic instinct to breathe, the split-second lie about enlisting, the cold logic of avoiding armored vehicles, and the sheer fortitude required to pressure-wash human remains out of your work vehicle every single day.
The common thread in all these I should be dead stories, it's not just what happened to them, but the precise decision they made in that nanosecond between the threat and the consequence. It was always an active choice, even when that choice was running toward the gun because the will to live had temporarily been superseded by the desire to end the struggle.
It forces us to entirely reconsider the definition of risk and safety in our own lives.
Exactly. So we'll leave you with this provocative thought to mull over. In your own life, when you feel safe, how often is that safety a function of your skill, your preparation, and your careful calculation, the things you actively control? And how often is it just raw, terrifying luck that the pressure washer wasn't aimed at your vehicle today? The difference between being prepared and being spared might be a lot smaller than we think,